This is IGN. A perfectly competent RPG that showcases Obsidian's writing and world-building chops, but has little else to distinguish itself. This is your IGN review of Avowed by Travis Northrop. On the heels of an insect-filled survival game and a 2D detective story straight out of the 16th century that were pleasantly surprising departures from what developer Obsidian does best, Avowed is a return to that traditional action RPG comfort food we know and love. Set in the fantasy universe of Pillars of Eternity, this is a game that's filled with all my favorite RPG cliches, like standing around a campfire with my party members to exchange dark backstories and unresolved traumas, and looting every single slain enemy before their corpses even begun to cool. Per Obsidian's pedigree, the writing, world building, and open world maps are all quite good, and running around lobbing deadly spells at reanimated skeletons and violent lizard folk to claim shiny new gear is as entertaining as you might expect, if not exactly breaking new ground. That's a bit of a trend, actually. Avowed draws so much from the Skyrims and Dragon Ages of the past that it ends up an overall unsurprising adventure that has few distinctive ideas to call its own. As both a chosen godlike imbued with magical powers and the envoy of the Emperor, your character is granted a downright irresponsible amount of authority to do whatever you please, and you're dispatched to the wild continent of the Living Lands to put an end to a mysterious plague of madness called the Dream Scourge, while also finding the time to aid any person on the street who asks you for help with whatever personal problem they might have. You'll spend your days delving into ruined yet beautiful caves, sewers, and forgotten places in search of loot and XP, while taking every opportunity to wail on beasts and ne'er-do-wells with swords, bows, and spells. Yes, this is basically the premise of every Western RPG from the past several decades, but that's because it's a formula that works reliably. Avowed executes almost every aspect of it quite well. This is especially true of the dialogue and story, which is without question the thing Avowed does best. Leaning into Obsidian's substantial world-building chops, Avowed is absolutely brimming with lore that builds upon the world the Pillars of Eternity games established, and it's easy to lose hours just reading books and scrolls or discussing politics with the locals of every major region. When you aren't chatting up the locals, you'll probably be sending them back to the wheel for reincarnation via Avowed's tumultuous combat. You'll face off against the usual baddies, from typical fantasy creatures and animals to anthropomorphic mushrooms and people driven to madness by the Dream Scourge. Fighting with melee weapons and magic feels smoother and more competent than it does in many similar fantasy RPGs, but evading dozens of enemies as they charge through sickly marshes and barren deserts isn't as easy as it looks. My biggest issue with combat is in the variety of opponents. I found myself fighting the same handful of enemy types everywhere I ventured, and almost none of them are interesting or unique in their behaviors to begin with. But one unique aspect of Avowed is its exploration, and just how much it wants you to engage with its parkour system. It gives you ample opportunities to leap from ledge to ledge, mantling over this and that as you search for hidden treasure chests and avoid traps. This is an emphasis on mobility that's fairly unusual for the genre, and it adds an activity that's a welcome change from the routine to focus on in between or sometimes during combat. With awesome world building and stellar character writing, Avowed reminds me of why I fell in love with Obsidian's RPGs in the first place. However, the bigger picture is that it plays it quite safe, with a by-the-numbers fantasy adventure that's more familiar than evolutionary, and there's barely any enemy variety to keep its swords and sorcery battles interesting for long. Even if it doesn't swing for the fences or leave a memorable mark on the genre, though, it's still perfectly competent with all the tried and true stuff I expect, including chaotic combat, leveling systems, and a loot progression that lets you build the kind of character you want to play, and meaningful decisions that can have a massive impact on the world. Plus, the whole thing's surprisingly technically stable compared to its reliably unreliable peers. I enjoyed my time parkouring my way through Aora, and think you will too. Just don't expect Avowed to show you anything you haven't seen before. Avowed's IGN score? 7 out of 10. Thanks for listening to IGN. My name is Tony Jackson, and for the latest updates on Avowed, visit us at IGN.com.
Spoken Layer.